tell the audience about how you got started in real estate. Mark and Tanner, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, they were patient enough to deal with all the technical difficulties we had getting started. This was supposed to be live, but it happens. Let's give a little bit of a background on who you guys are, what you do, and then we'll get into some questions. Tanner, you want to start?
Sure. I'm a Seattle native, went to University of Utah for undergrad, and then just found that I loved it here. And so I've now stuck around for 10 years now, I think. I started in the industry about 8-9 years ago. And actually the first office I worked in, Mark and I were, we technically didn't work for the same company, but we worked in the same office together at Newmark and Mountain West. And then I broke off with my partners, Chris Hatch, Joe Mills, and Rob Sweeney, and we formed Legend Partners in December of 2017. And then now just have, loved growing that company and growing our retail market share. And I'm now running the Legend Partners office in Salt Lake City. So It's been a good run.
Great. Mark?
Yeah, my name is Mark Jensen. I'm a multifamily investment broker in Utah. I've been a broker for 19 years now, focused on in mostly Utah, but Intermountain West investment sales and multifamily and development. I work with a team of 8 people with my partners, Raleigh Nielsen, Darren Nielsen, Mark Numbers joined our team about a year and a half ago. 2 years ago, we've got full, we've got Luke Mata as our chief analyst. Jared Whipple has been with me for about a decade now, kind of as our COO, and Rachel Smith joined us about 2 years ago on the graphic design part. And anyway, we love Utah multifamily. We're involved in everything from development sales to investment sales of institutional quality stuff and everything in between, whether it's equity, debt, the full capital stack. We just like to see Utah continue to move forward. So excited to be on the podcast. Known Tanner a long time, so excited to be here with him.
Yeah. Tanner Olsen, he's known for a long time.
I've known Tanner Webster a long time too.
Yeah, cool. All right. Big question on everybody's mind is distress, specifically multifamily distress. Mark, do you want to talk about that for a minute?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think we're kind of probably in the second or third inning of what could be a really long baseball game. I think Utah is pretty well known we enter in recessions later and come out sooner. So, if you're trying to snipe that window of the bottom, I think Utah is pretty tough to do. In 2009, 10, and 11, people would call all the time and they'd say, hey, send us your foreclosures, send us your foreclosures. There were 0 multifamily foreclosures in the Wasatch Front in the great financial crisis of 2009 through 2011. It's not totally true because there was actually one, the Wasatch Apartments in Midvale, but it wasn't built on a permanent foundation. It was moved military housing. So anyway, that's a long story, but
doesn't count.
There was one. Doesn't count. So Utah can, performs really well. I think what you'll see in the coming months, potentially, and this is what we're already starting to see in other markets, is really the few, what I'd call high octane loans that come due. So somebody that bought a deal 2020, 2021, 2022, got a 75 or 80%, loan to cost construction deal or a short-term bridge loan, value add loan that's coming due. And really we have seen shifts in value, but worse than that, we've seen shifts in proceeds. So, if you bought a deal for $100 million and you owe $70 million, banks right now are probably going to give you $55 million. And so you've got to come up with kind of that gap, and that bridge is really what people are trying to work through over the next couple of months. But I would tell you, it's a very small list in Utah. Denver and Phoenix and Dallas and Vegas, you saw a lot of fix and flip value add deals. I mean, there were deals that we saw trade every year for 8 years straight in Phoenix, as this market just kind of ramped up. In our market, we just have a lot of long-term holders. So most of the people here, the joke is make your money someplace else, but keep it in Utah. And I really think you'll see that kind of play out over the next couple of months. We have seen performance dip a little bit. We'll talk a little bit about that. So there are pressures on NOI and valuations and proceeds, but it's only if you have to sell. If you don't have to sell, performance is actually not that far off from kind of pre-COVID levels.
And you talked about kind of that gap on the, we'll say $70 million loan, $55 million of proceeds. how are you currently seeing that solved? Is it capital calls to LPs? Is it pref equity coming in? Have you really seen a lot of that? How's that getting navigated right now?
Yeah, I mean, in Utah, there hasn't been a lot of that. The loans that are coming due are typically getting extended. Like, hey, give us more time. Most of our loans in that world are in the construction phase, and most of those groups typically will have 6 month or a year extensions kind of built in. So, like I said, I feel like in Utah, we're probably in the second or third inning of that. I only think it'll affect maybe 3 or 4% of the total, you know, volume of deals that we have in the market. So it won't be very big. But there is rescue capital that we'll talk about that's kind of come into the market to kind of help with that. It eats away at your cash flow. It's typically at 11, 12, 13, 14, 15% IRRs. But it bridges that gap, and then you can kind of punt and get through it. So far, I'm not aware of anyone that's had to do that in this market. People are pretty creative. Utah is also a place where lots of capital wants to be and feels safer here. And so you have seen some groups that were able to say, hey, we'll give you a bit of this, a bit of this, a bit of this through our portfolio. Just help us with this one problem. It's pretty unique to have just one project that's, completely isolated that's going to bomb. Typically, it's part of a portfolio, and people so far have been able to work through most of their issues.
Cool. Tanner, there hasn't been a lot of retail development over the past couple of years. We kind of went through that retail apocalypse of, the last decade or so. Mm-hmm. Speak to the kind of vacancy. And I mean, I don't think there's as much stress compared to, or I guess signs of distress in retail as other asset classes. What's your thought on that?
I think you can drive around the whole Wasatch Front right now, and you'll find the least amount of existing vacancy you've probably ever seen in the last, longer than I've been alive. I would say retail vacancy right now is at an all-time low. Any vacancy that may be perceived might be new construction that's being marketed right now. And so I think that's probably the only stuff that you're going to see.
And that's mostly the suburban retail that you're referring to. Let's talk a little bit about the downtown retail. Feels like every multifamily apartment complex I've ever seen just has, vacant retail as part of their underwriting. Is anything going on with that?
Our downtown is probably our highest level of vacancy. And it's not because downtown's performing poorly in terms of how tenants are doing or restaurants are doing. It more just has to do with the fact that we've created a larger supply of retail in our market in a very short period of time than we've ever seen in the downtown's history as well. So all the new projects that Mark's talking about coming online, the city made them put in anywhere from 2 to 10 to 20,000 square feet of retail underneath their project. And so that space, A, because we built so much downtown at the same time, and then B, just because we eliminated a lot of single-story existing old retail product and have replaced it now with new product that it's a lot tougher to build out a restaurant underneath, 10 stories of multifamily or office. There's just a lot more complications with building underneath mixed-use projects compared to in the suburbs. So I think that also just creates a lot of challenge and absorption for our downtown.
And we were talking beforehand on suburban rents and just how insanely high they are. How much room do we have to run on the upside with suburban rents?
I think we'll see a good indicator in the next 6 to 12 months of can we really sustain the growth of rents and new construction in our suburban markets? In the Hurricane Utah of the world and Eagle Mountain and Tooele and you name it, small town, you're seeing rents of new construction product in the low 40s to low 50s for drive-through spaces. That's eclipsing our downtown and even Sugar House, which at one point in time we thought was the sexiest market in Utah by, $10 to $15 a square foot. So we haven't seen a lot of failures in these suburban markets yet. We have seen really strong sales of a lot of restaurants and retailers in these markets. So I think really until we start seeing new construction tenants failing, I think we'll just kind of see a steady, clip along of rent growth in the suburbs.
How much of that is driven by construction costs? Because I have clients that have retail pads and they're like, hey, we're on hold because the rent, the cost of the building, rent is just not quite covering it. The Chipotles of the world have kind of capped out on what they're willing to pay.
1,000% of what Mark's saying. Most of that rent growth is just simply supply and demand of, well, if you want to be here, you have to pay this because there's nowhere else to go. And so a good example is I have a national credit burger operator that wants to be in Clinton right now. Well, the existing product in Clinton is like $25 a square foot, probably on average across the board. Well, if he wants to be in Clinton, he's going to have to pay $42 a square foot, but he may justify that because all the retailers in Clinton right now are doing fantastic. And so it's an interesting retail market right now.
Speaking of kind of retail markets expanding and, people coming here, which franchisers are expanding most rapidly right now?
I think anyone that is a publicly traded company right now still seems to be expanding. Some of that is because you're just trying to prove to your shareholders that you can still grow. So Starbucks is still super active, Dutch, Chipotle, McDonald's is still doing deals. Jack in the Box entered the market. They're pretty active right now. Chick-fil-A, pretty much all the gold standard A credit tenants are still doing deals right now. It feels like they can most easily absorb those higher rent costs. They can also ground lease, and so therefore a lot more options are opening to them. The franchise world is totally different because just mom and pop retailers are going to be a lot more sensitive. I mean, they may have the national name of a franchise behind them, but that still doesn't mean that their net worth is necessarily going to be nearly as strong as a national credit corporation. So there are a lot of growing franchises. It's just not going to be at the same level as someone who's maybe a corporately backed company.
What's behind the expansion announcements of like Starbucks wanting 17,000 more units and Dutch Bros with X thousand more units? I mean, is there a reason behind those types of announcements?
Good question. I'm not going to lie. Like, I would love to know the answer to all things retail, but I think just proving shareholder growth. That's the only thing I can think of that would really drive the massive amount of.
Yeah. It just caught me off guard just as a layman on the retail side because you'd think they would do things internally like, hey, we're going to go. And so I didn't know if it was like a competitive advantage to say like we are able to and capable and we want to do this, or if it was shareholder based, but because that got a lot of wheels turning.
Oh, for sure.
Same thing with Dutch Brothers, making those announcements. They've been one of the fastest expansion coffee drive-throughs, I imagine, regionally or nationally. So anyway, that was interesting.
Yeah. All right. Getting back to multifamily, another big, I feel like all the questions for the show just went back to multifamily. Sorry, Tanner. But
Tanner and I talk a lot. He's helped a lot with our multifamily on the design side.
What are these institutions on the sidelines saying right now? We've had record amounts of, dry powder, Blackstone, Starwood.
Yeah.
Basically, everybody's trying to raise a fund right now. At what point do they jump back in? Is it 10%, 15%? What do they need to see in order to get really excited about the market again?
Oh, man. I love this question. So I'm not very smart, but let me tell you the best answer came from one of my institutional clients because he said, do you know why, the banks went, Silicon Valley Bank, SVB, like, do you know why SVB went away? And it's really because they had so much cash on hand. They bought bonds at 3.5. The minute those went to 4.5, like all of a sudden they were devalued. So he was explaining to me, like, we have all this cash on the sidelines, like we are ready to deploy, but what we will not do is allow that acquisition to be devalued. So they will literally wait until they know that their acquisition will be in the money, if you will. And then he's like, you will see us all come back in. We're just a herd. So what that tells us is that we just haven't hit bottom. So on our last two deals, we did call for offers on pretty large institutional deals in the market this year. One of them, we had 14 offers. The bottom 7 offers on our offering matrix were in the top 15 ownership groups in the nation. And that scared me because this was earlier this year. Basically, like they see two things. One, that we have a further to drop in their opinion. And two, that there's other markets they can get better values in than here. Because they're not gonna buy a deal here at a 5.5 cap if they can buy a deal in Dallas or Atlanta or Tallahassee or Orlando, at a 7 cap, right? Like they have to do what's best for their allocation of capital. So I think it's twofold. Once they recognize the market is bottomed or it's close to it and they'll be in the money in a short period of time, they'll jump back in. And we also need our market to be similar priced. I think we price at a higher or lower risk premium than other markets because number one in population growth, top 5 in job growth, and institutions really need to go where they're going to get the best yield, risk adjusted. And Salt Lake City is pretty expensive right now. So,
14 offers is like way higher than I was expecting.
Yeah.
One of the questions was like, how far apart are sellers and buyers right now? Apparently not that far apart.
We're pretty far apart in that I think it's just sentiment. Particularly if you represent other people's money, you're being really careful right now. There's 1031 buyers. There's people that they're looking long term and want super high quality assets. They're just looking for legacy deals or solid cash flow. But if you're chasing yield right now, it's pretty. There is a pretty big difference. And I'll tell you, we were asked, one of the questions at Interface a few weeks ago. We didn't get to this question in the Q&A, but it was basically like, what do you see as the biggest headwind? And I would tell you the biggest headwind right now is just IRR. So IRR is cash flow plus appreciation divided by the period of time that you hold an asset, right? Well, if you don't see rents going up and you see expenses going up, you're seeing declining NOI, you're not going to underwrite, you're not going to underwrite cap rate compression either with where interest rates have kind of been. And so all of that IRR has to come out of cash flow, which means it has to come off day one of your purchase price. And explaining that to a lot of our owners in the market has been really interesting because yes, your property's worth $100 million. We know that. But right now with these buyers and what they're underwriting, we're also seeing, not only interest rates are up, but you have your property taxes have gone considerably up and insurance nationally has gone up. And a buyer is going to err on their side of the ledger right now, especially when, there's a lot of capital that wants deals and there's not a lot of deals. That's why you're seeing 14 offers on some of the deals that we take to market. But there's just a lot of headwinds working against valuations in general in the short term.
And let's compare and contrast how people were underwriting in 2020, 2021, early 22 compared to now. Are they assuming any rent growth, negative rent growth? What are you seeing on that side?
I'd say we've seen a lot of that erode, over the last 6 to 8 months. It's been really interesting because before it was just an interest rate discussion, like, hey, we can't make this pencil because interest rates are, keep going up 40 bips. But reality is kind of now we're seeing rents sort of flatten. We've seen net effective rent growth, if you calculate in concessions in the downtown market, down 2.4% year over year. So we actually have started to see rents decline. So again, going back to the IRR discussion, if you're seeing rents decline and you're seeing your operating expenses go up, you're seeing erosion of NOI and at higher exit cap rates, you can see where values have been hit. But hopefully that starts to settle in and things start to improve. We've already seen interest rates come back. So, the hope is that by Q2, Q3, Q4 of 2024, that we start to see things settle down and get back to business.
Tanner, speaking of operating expenses, taxes, insurance, a lot of that's just getting handed off to the tenants through the form of a triple net lease. Has that affected anybody as far as operating fundamentals? Are you seeing anything start to slip in that regard?
I think Utah, actually, we have an advantage in triple net lease property just because you go to Denver right now and a triple net on a building right now might be $20 to $30 a square foot. The same triple net in Utah's $8 to $9 a square foot. But that operator's not doing 20 to 30% more business in Denver versus Salt Lake City. So I think it is to our advantage right now for a lot of national companies to look at coming to Utah just because our triple nets at the end of the day it's all rent. And so it's a lot more favorable that your overall operating cost is going to be lower here in Utah. And then I think contrary to the multifamily market, in retail, a lot of your leases are 5 and 10-year leases. A lot of them have built-in rent growth into them. So I just think that retail as an investment asset class is looked at a little bit more favorable right now, especially stuff that wasn't built in the last 18 months, because then that those rents are probably already under market. We sold two multi-tenant retail buildings in Davis and Weber County, and both of them we fully leased up around 18 to 24 months ago, and already those brand new buildings, those leases are under market today, which is crazy.
That's cool.
That is crazy.
Sense.
If you are a multifamily developer downtown and you're required to put in retail, what are you doing to set yourself apart from the glut of supply that is going to be coming on in the next 2-3 years?
You go find the best food and bev operator in town and you build a retail space. Like if you already have a site in mind, you build your retail space around him. You bring him in. I don't know if you can make him an equity partner, but you find every way possible to create the most badass possible food and beverage operation as you possibly can, because right now, the right retail tenant mix underneath your project might be the difference in your lease up. So I think it was a very backwards look 2, 3 years ago where we had all these developers in our downtown market that were building product, and then the retail space was an afterthought that they just had to do to get through the city. Instead, today, I am seeing a lot better developments in our downtown where they've put a lot more creativity and thought into how that retail space is built out to hopefully land a little bit of a sexier tenant underneath food and beverage or soft goods of some kind.
Can you talk about a little bit of the creativity regarding that? Is it bigger windows? Is it higher ceilings? Like, what are some of the characteristics that you think are important for these retailers?
Yeah, I think you see it in Denver and you see it in Austin, Texas, and Nashville. It's a lot of natural light. It's even just like the functionality of attracting a restaurant tenant. There's so many little minute details that go into running a restaurant in terms of like, where do you bring trash? How do you load in, food into the kitchen? How much power do you have to supply to the kitchen? How do you run a hood out of a kitchen up 30 stories to get to the top of the roof to be able to, vent a hood? Where do you put a grease trap? If it's 100 degrees and you have a grease trap on right underneath your patio and it stinks, I mean,
Yeah.
it's amazing how like 15 different little factors affect a retail space being leasable or not. So you've definitely seen developers learn the hard way on building out retail space in our downtown. There's a couple that have sat vacant now for 5, 6 years, and I think we won't see that again because I think people have learned their lesson a little bit.
So, going back to the glut of supply that's coming on downtown, Mark, we talked a little bit before the show about, some buildings are doing really well. Some you're starting to see operating fundamentals slip a little bit more than average. What are the good people doing that the bad people or the less good people are not doing?
Yeah, I don't think it's good or bad. I think this all kind of plays into this discussion because as Tanner's talking about the retail, like we saw the early multifamily development really kickstart like in 2014, 15. Like I had sold fourth and fifth to Wasatch where they built Encore, which is 129 units on an acre and a half. So it was 189 units the acre. And they were sort of one of the first deals along Fourth South to really be forced to do retail. Well, what did they do? They just kind of did storefronts, and they got away at that time with doing their leasing office as part of the commercial. And, but there's really no connectivity or activity. So a lot of what was built that period of time was really in response to demand and need for housing. I think moving forward, what we're seeing is much more qualified design and creativity because we know we're going to have to compete for those tenants when you have so many buildings kind of coming up. So now I would just tell you that it's location, location, location. We're going back to basics as we've seen weakness in the market on the leasing side or absorption or just traffic to your site. A lot of times it's just because, everything worked the last decade. And now we're sort of seeing, what isn't going to work in a more competitive environment. I mean, I was joking today, like if you're a tenant and you're looking to lease up right now, some places are offering 8 weeks free in downtown Salt Lake City, which has kind of caught us off guard because it went from no concessions, market's healthy to like, what's going on? But if you want to rent in downtown Salt Lake City, there are like 9 different properties in lease up right now.
Yeah.
I mean, what kind of tenant has that kind of time to figure out where they're going to go? And so, of course, they're shopping and starting by price point. I'd love to see the stats, and we can certainly talk to some management companies about traffic and how many properties you actually see. But if you're working at, a retailer and you have a Friday afternoon to go find a place, you're not going to go tour 9 projects, And so I don't know, we're going to learn a lot the next couple of months. I loved your comment, Tanner, about sort of this next, 6 to 10 months or whatever it is. I think on our side too, on the multifamily side, we're going to be a lot and we're watching it very closely.
So you mentioned location, location, location. If you are, we'll say a long-term capital looking to enter Salt Lake City, what market are you specifically most interested in? Is it East Side? Is it Sugar House? Is it North Temple? What's most exciting for you?
Oh man, I mean, I'm super bullish on Utah long term. I think that's why people want to come here anyway. They see the demographics and growth of the Intermountain West of Utah, Idaho, Montana, Wyoming. There's so many positive things in the short term, though. There's a lot of headwinds. In the GFC, I pivoted because pricing on investment sales wasn't quite back to 2007 pricing, and so I moved in more to development because there was still a lot of margin in development. We didn't quite know we needed as many units at the time, I feel like, as we know that we need now. But right now, I can't pivot from investment sales having the bid ask gap over to development because all of a sudden development isn't penciling. So when you say what am I excited about, I'm excited about. I mean, I'll tell you what I'm most excited about. Now is the time for people that have always wanted to develop and be in this market to come hang out with us, because before we would have 40 offers on a single development site. Now we're trying to work through like what will pencil to a 6.5 return on cost. What does the market actually need? What niches and opportunities exist. But I'll tell you that most people right now in the market today, they want to do build to rent townhomes, build to rent single family, 3-story garden style walk up. They're all chasing Tanner's high lease rates on the retail side into the burbs. And so our team's done a lot and, a lot more exploration. Like I've been meeting with every city in the Wasatch Front, from Springville to Roy to being out in Cedar Valley and Eagle Mountain and Saratoga Springs and Lehigh, because that's where the growth is currently penciling. So, I mean, a lot of it depends on whether or not the math works. So what do I want to see? I want to see more high quality infill urban, attainable housing in the market, the missing middle. And I think you'll continue to see a lot of that because it still does pencil. But in the short term, it's pretty tough to make development pencil in Utah.
On kind of the missing middle note, I mean, I'm a huge fan of townhomes, obviously. Uh, and I think they kind of get lumped in together with apartments in generality just because they are built for rent. How have the operating fundamentals of townhomes compared to, your typical 5/2 apartment complex?
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons we love the missing middle is you have all these people, whether they're graduated from college or they're silver grays downsizing. You just have a big demographic that wants space, and maybe they don't want to go in and go up an elevator 4 floors and have access to a sweet pool and a golf simulator and a gym. Maybe they don't need all those things, and space does matter, especially in Utah. We see lower vacancy, we see lower turnover in townhomes. We've seen rents as high per square foot in townhomes as we have in stacked product, and so I think that's another reason why people want to go build more of it. But I think long term townhome just fits a broader base of renter profile. People also, they stay longer. So typical stays in multifamily are maybe 1.4 years or something. In townhomes, you're probably well over 2, would be my guess. So there's just a lot of benefits to townhomes. Now you're seeing people develop townhomes with amenities, which is really cool. We just toured with Brian Flam, DA. I did a deal in Sandy called Orchard, which is 96 units on, just under, it was 10 acres. So you're about 9.6 units the acre. Amazing clubhouse, amazing common space. They're doing one in West Valley City right now that's going to have a full water park. Wow. So I think people are recognizing that, it's 2/3 cheaper to rent a townhouse than it would be to go buy it with current mortgage rates. And so I think it sort of hits that affordability for a lot of people as well.
Absolutely. I have a question for both of you. Let's say it's 6 months down the road and operating fundamentals are terrible and the market's bad. You're taking out deals to the market and you're getting offers. What should good buyers do in order to get the trust from the brokers in the future? Like if I'm underwriting a deal to 60% under asking price, should I even mail that in, or what should I even do there? Tanner, let's start with you on that.
Man, it's going to take a lot for retail to get to that point, I think, at where we're at right now. I think track record is obviously one thing that you can show. Owning anything in the state and just an understanding of how retail works in the state, I think is going to be a huge benefit to anyone, proving that they're the right buyer for a product. Retail in Utah doesn't necessarily behave like it does in surrounding states. And so I think just understanding the consumer of Utah is going to make you a better retail buyer and a better retail operator and owner.
Cool. Mark, I bet a bunch of people go to seminars and they learn how to syndicate multifamily with friends and syndicate multifamily with, some of their friends from college or friends and family money. How many lowball offers, how does that make you react? Kind of speak to that process.
I don't know. I mean, I'd say we get a lot of phone calls from different groups, and it doesn't take long when you're in the business a long time to really vet quickly. Like, is this somebody that can actually execute? I mean, I'd say one of my superpowers is on the first phone call, I know whether or not we can get across the finish line with people. You just kind of have that sense. I know Tanner has in his world as well. It has been interesting a couple years. Like, shout out to Grant Cardone. Grant's a great guy, but he runs these seminars, and we get lots of people that are like, hey, we're partnered. You might know my partner, Grant Cardone. It's like, we just got 700 of the same phone call, So I actually called Grant out on Clubhouse in March because he was like, I'll come to Utah if you can get me 1,000 units. So we sent him a 1,000-unit portfolio, and it was crickets, just FYI. But I think it's interesting because we try to be careful because, everybody starts somewhere. And the reality is that different capital has different needs and wants. We've had a lot of success working with, I've got one couple in mind right now that we've sold a couple of deals to, and, they're a part of a network. I think it's called Multifamily Mindset or something. I have no idea who they are or what they do, but you cannot invest with them unless you're part of that group. And they've got incredible resources inside of that. So it's a really long way of saying that we've actually transacted with people that you would consider uneducated syndicators and had a lot of success. Our goal as brokers is really to create a win-win. If I have a listing, my job is to, one, get a deal done, but two, really vet out surety of close and get the highest price from the most qualified buyer that's at the table at that time. And I would say that we have a really good network, obviously after 19 years in a proprietary database of making sure that we get the most exposure and have the right buyers at the table. But I don't think I wouldn't shun away anybody that calls, although that has picked up quite a bit in the last few years. I'll tell you, it's going to get quiet.
Yeah. I'm actually curious about like an XY graph of interest rates versus the amount of people who call you asking about multifamily. That'd be an interesting graph that we should post.
Here's one for you. And this is Justin Vandenecker of Bluefield Capital. And by the way, if like you're looking for equity for deals, like connect with Justin because he's funded a couple of townhome build to rent products that we've worked on with him. But we were at NMHC a couple years ago, and he was like standing there with his arms crossed, looking around. I was like, what are you doing? He's like, I'm going to raise a fund based on the number of people that show up to NMHC. So NMHC is the National Multi-Housing Council conference. It's every year, but it alternates East Coast, West Coast. So anyway, it is kind of interesting because that was 2 years ago, and it was the highest they've ever had there. And he was saying, I think it's time to short the market. So we'll see January 28th how many people show up to NMHC this year.
That's
I was going to curtail a little bit about what Mark was saying too is I've definitely become very good at screening vape shops from calling on any of my listings at this point. But I think getting a commercial real estate broker to represent you if you're a tenant in the retail market right now is hugely important. We've had, because I think home sales have slowed down quite a bit, we've seen a lot of residential realtors try to do commercial deals. And I think it's great if they want to get into commercial real estate. Absolutely, I'm all for it. But get someone on your team who has an understanding of doing commercial real estate and deal negotiating to be on your side. Too many times I see a tenant that may, for all I know, could be the next best restaurant in Utah, call directly themselves, but they maybe just don't necessarily know square one on where to go from a deal. And so it's tough to really get the attention of a really strong landlord if you're not well represented by someone. So, make sure that you have an understanding of who you're working with and come prepared.
That's great advice. Let's bring it home with this. What are your predictions for the next 6, 9, 12 months? Tanner, you want to start with that?
Yeah, I think as people's wallets tighten up a little bit, I do think you'll see a little bit more vacancy creep up in existing retail. We've seen a couple of national tenants right now flirting with Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Does that become the next level of bankruptcy after that? I think only time will tell on that. But the market right now, there is so much demand for mid-box space and quality restaurant space that, as far as I know, we just saw 3, 4, 5 Bed Bath & Beyonds hit the market 6 months ago. All of those are leased. Every Burger King, when the Meridian Burger King operator went bankrupt, almost every single one of those has now had a new tenant or has multiple offers on it right now. So it's going to take a little while for retail to really feel a hurt in terms of vacancy, but I do think that'll creep up a little bit.
Mark, what about you? What's your predictions?
Predictions, man. I think there's going to be continued short-term headwinds. I mean, interest rates are hurting us, vacancies are hurting us, buyer underwriting is hurting us. But man, medium-term and long-term, we need so much housing. I mean, just next year alone, they're anticipating 17,000 net immigration positive. So, where are those people going to live? We're delivering 14,000 units between now and 2026. But a lot of our discussion, those are a lot of the same units. So I think you're going to see some issues if you're delivering 14,000 of the same units. But overall, our market needs housing. I think you're going to continue to see growth in the suburbs. For sale product, which we haven't really touched on because that's not my specialty, but all the home builders are ramping up. I know that some local home builders are announcing that they're going to do between 15 and 20% increase starts next year. So they're anticipating a much larger home for sale need than they've currently been able to meet. That's probably coming off of them dipping down a little bit, in preparation for what might be coming. But I think overall our market's going to continue to perform well. We have an unlimited amount of capital that wants to be here. To your point earlier, it just has to be at the right metrics. It has to pencil. But I think in Q2, Q3 of 2024, I think we're going to learn a lot between now and then. I think people will decide how and when they can jump back in and where pricing is. You're only going to see a few deals that have to meet the market. I'd say that most of our market won't trade. Just as a quick statistic, as a percentage of stock, we typically trade between 2 and 3%. So if there's 100,000 units, we'll trade between 2 and 3,000 units in Utah. Phoenix is about 13 to 15%, and Vegas is about the same. And so what people don't realize here in Utah is that people come here and they hold long term. And so you just won't see, even if somebody has an issue and they had to fire sell, it won't affect the rest of the market. It won't creep into the rest of the market. So we're super stable. Number one in population growth, top 5 in job growth, largest number of people per household in the United States, which bodes well for retail, bodes well for multifamily. Household formation is going to continue. I think our biggest challenge is supply, honestly, because we have affordability issues that we didn't have. We're going to start to lose companies coming to Utah. They'll choose a Denver or an Austin or a Nashville until we can get that affordability down. So I actually think there's a lot of positives to all the units that we're delivering, and we just have to wade through this short-term heartache.
Cool. I think we'll leave it there. Thanks, guys.
Well, thanks.
Thank you.